So outline broad brush for us, if you will, why you object to what the United States did in Venezuela on Saturday morning.
Megyn, thanks for having me, and I appreciate you being open to a dissenting perspective on this. It's important we have debate. And in fairness to Fox News, it wasn't just Fox News that is cheerleading this. You could see so many major news networks cheering this on, CBS News and NBC. So this truly, which underscores that this is even though this is Trump's policy, it is bipartisan. There's been a regime change campaign going on in Venezuela by the U.S. for a very, very long time, which everybody in power has supported. And it's important to raise questions and to, challenge the assumptions that have been made to justify this campaign. The reason why I object to this is, first of all, I don't think we have the right to regime change foreign countries. We don't accept foreign countries interfering in the U.S. If we believe in the rule of law, international law, states being equal, states having rights, we don't have the right to go and overthrow a foreign government just because we don't like them. And in Venezuela in particular, it's obvious why we've been doing it. I mean, Trump, to his credit, has been very clear about this. It's for their oil. He said that on Saturday that we're going to take their oil under the so-called Donroe Doctrine. And I don't grant any state the right to do that. It's also going to have serious human consequences. As you mentioned earlier, people were already killed in this attack, which hasn't gotten very much coverage, but dozens of people at least were killed, including civilians inside Venezuela. And if this regime change campaign escalates, many more will be fated to die, including possibly, as you mentioned, U.S. soldiers who will be forced to go in and finish the job. But this has been going on for a very, very long time. A brief history, Venezuela first faced a U.S.-backed regime change campaign back in the early 2000s when the Bush administration supported the ouster of Hugo Chavez, tried to install someone who tried to cancel the Constitution. That was reversed by popular uprising and loyalist military members. But the campaign has continued ever since. And it's been pursued in recent years with sanctions that have had devastating consequences to Venezuela, which then is subsequently used as a pretext to justify regime change. So, for example, there have been many migrants coming from Venezuela. And then if you listen to Marco Rubio, he says, this is one of the reasons why we have to intervene, because we have to stop this migration crisis. Well, what doesn't get mentioned by Marco Rubio and most media accounts of this is that the sanctions we imposed on Venezuela knowingly caused migration. Thomas Shannon, who served under Trump in his first term at the State Department, he warned at the time that, in his words, the sanctions were going to grind the Venezuelan economy into dust and have huge human consequences, one of which would be out-migration. And that's predictable. When you target a country's economy with crippling sanctions, especially Venezuela's oil industry, which accounts for most of its revenue, you're going to cause economic misery. A lot of people fled that as a result. So then we take the migrants and the fact that they're fleeing, and we use that as a pretext to go and overthrow the government when it's the regime change effort to begin with that has caused this. So look, legally, I don't think we have the right to. And in terms of consequences, I just think this is a disaster for everybody, because as we've seen, regime change campaigns abroad have spillover effects everywhere, including inside the U.S.
The one thing I keep thinking about is before we got Gaddafi in Libya, and that place just turned into a hellhole, we were having sort of proxy fights with Libya. I mean, they weren't really proxy. It was kind of on the nose. But they were conducting certain terrorist operations against us. And then we conducted certain certain military operations against Libya. And it all culminated in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, by Libya. And that was one of my first introductions to international terrorism as a young woman, because I was starting at Syracuse University in 1988. And it happened that there were 35 Syracuse University students on board Pan Am 103. They had been studying abroad in London and were on their way home. And that flight had been targeted by Libya for terrorist activity back at a time when we weren't requiring bags to be identified with their passenger. You could put one on in one city and it would be transferred if the plane had a layover without any question that the person who owned the bag is no longer flying on board the plane. And that's how they managed to bomb this flight that brought down hundreds of Americans, killed hundreds of Americans, including 35 students at my own university where I just started. And it was something that always I was remembered. You know, we were there every 4 years. There would be the memorials. They were sort of young people, 18, 19-year-old people with their whole lives in front of them. My point is simply, you start these actions and you think, great, okay, like back at the time, they had attacked us. There had been terrorism by Libya. So, of course, we bombed them. Okay, great. Yes, go America. Again, put on your cheerleader uniform. They deserved it. Good for us. And now, you look at those parents of the 35 Syracuse University students. I'm sure they're not feeling so great about it. So that's just one example, Aaron, where you just don't know what you're starting. And our mutual friend Glenn Greenwald has been pointing out that it's very normal for the cheerleading to happen after an action like this. There's like a froth that builds up amongst the media. We love our military. We're proud of our guys for, superbly executing such a difficult and dangerous mission. Of course we are. And we're proud of the United States of America for being able to do that in a way that probably no other country can. But that doesn't really answer the bigger question about how is this going to come back to haunt us? And not just us, but our kids, our children.
Yes, because it's people on the ground who have to pay the price of these decisions made from above. I mean, how many people lost their lives in Vietnam and so many other countless wars that were a disaster for everybody involved. And if you look at some of the reasons that we get, so another reason, a major one that the Trump administration claims is Maduro is a narco trafficker. I mean, Megyn, you have a legal background. I'd be curious your thoughts if you've on the indictment and the strength of it. I mean, I noticed that one of the counts that Maduro faces is possession of machine guns, which I don't understand. I mean, first of all, I don't understand why it's a big concern for the U.S. that Maduro has machine guns, and to me, it speaks to kind of this not being such a robust indictment. But he's accused of being a narco trafficker, and again, I don't think the evidence supports that. And it's also a harder case to make when Trump recently pardoned a convicted narco trafficker in the same court that indicted Maduro. And in the New York court, Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, he was found to take a bribe from a cartel, $1 million. He was caught on tape vowing to stuff the drugs up the gringos' noses, quoting him. There was a prison murder tied to his case, and Trump pardoned him. So just as he's launching a regime change campaign, in the name of fighting narco trafficking, he goes and convicts and pardons a convicted narco trafficker. So this strikes me as as we saw with Iraq, the pretext there.
Pretextual.
Yes. The pretext there was Iraq WMDs, which didn't exist. And I think we're following a very similar playbook here. At least Trump has the honesty. Unlike
I don't disagree.
To say this is about oil.
I totally agree with you that it's pretextual, that it is not about narco terrorism. I'm sure Trump does object to the amount of drugs coming our way from Venezuela. But of course, if you really want to crack down on countries that are sending drugs in the United States, you'll start with China and Mexico, not necessarily Venezuela. And to your point, he just pardoned this other guy who was obviously a party to that too. I agree that it's pretextual. It is about regime change. And I think he was being honest, though, when he said it's the Don Road doctrine. That I believe. And if you look at that, I haven't spent a lot of time studying the Monroe Doctrine, I'm going to be honest, from our fifth president, that basically said, not in our hemisphere. Not in our hemisphere. You're not going to, at the time it was Europe, you're not going to come and colonize anything in the Western Hemisphere, period. And we'll fight you if you do. And we did. We enforced that over years. And I was just kind of researching this morning, what was the constitutional authority for that? There wasn't really any. We kind of just made it up and said, we're just not going to allow it. And we've been doing it for 200 years now and getting away with it. And so I kind of understand his decision that forget the narco terrorism stuff. He had to use that as a pretext to get around congressional approval and all the other, legal requirements that would be there if this were actually declared a war or a military invasion or incursion of some sort. I think it really is Trump saying not in our hemisphere. I've seen Cuba's basically infiltrated Venezuela entirely. The relationship between those two has been totally interdependent, and they don't like Cuba, especially Marco Rubio. And China was there when we captured Maduro. They were getting closer and closer thanks to China's Belt and Road policy, where they're trying to inculcate themselves into various nations all over the world, including in South America, to make them less dependent on the United States and more dependent on China. And where that goes, we don't like. We don't know, but we know we don't like. And Russia, too, with the oil. So I think that was the honest answer. We don't like it. Because one of the reporters said to Trump, Aaron, what about the oil? Why the oil? And he said, why don't you ask Russia that? Why don't you ask China that? They're the ones who are focused on the Venezuela oil. And I do believe that's his actual reason, which I guess I share in that concern of Trump's, that them getting a big foothold in Venezuela, the Chinese, the Russians, and Cuba, it's not a great thing for the United States of America.
Well, listen, I don't share that view, but regardless of what you think about Venezuela's choice of allies, I think the question for the U.S. government is, if you are imposing policies that are designed to destabilize a foreign government, which I would argue has been the focus of U.S. policy in Venezuela for more than 2 decades, starting with the coup I mentioned earlier, the coup attempt against Hugo Chavez, what do you expect a country to do? If you support the overthrow of a government, they're not going to be too enthusiastic about working with you, and they're going to choose other allies. And that's what I think happened in Venezuela. I think if the U.S. hadn't been trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government for more than 2 decades, I don't think they'd be as keen to embrace allies like Russia and China. Maybe they would be, but certainly if you are if you were supporting the overthrow of a foreign government, which what the Bush administration did under Hugo Chavez, and that's continued, again, under both parties. Under Obama declared Venezuela to be a national security threat to the U.S., which had the impact of deterring investment in Venezuela, because that's what, if the most powerful country in the world says that you're a threat, banks are not going to want to do business with you. And so all these actions have isolated Venezuela. And to the extent that they would be willing to cooperate with the U.S., they haven't been so keen about that, given the efforts at regime change there. Now, I personally think that states have the right to make the alliances that they want, but whatever, we don't have to agree on that. I think when you have decades of policy aimed at regime change, and the U.S. has spent a lot of money via agencies that Trump has actually criticized, via groups like the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID, supporting the opposition in Venezuela. And so when you have a country doing that, I can understand why, in Venezuela's case, they went and sought other friends.
A new year means new financial goals, like making sure your savings are secure and diversified. Will this be the year you decide to talk to someone from Birch Gold Group? They use an educational approach with a deep understanding of macroeconomics. There are forces pushing the dollar lower and gold higher, which is why they believe every American should own physical gold. So until January 30th, until January 30th. If you're a first-time gold buyer, Birch Gold is offering a rebate of up to $10,000 on qualifying purchases. To claim eligibility and start the process, you just text MK to the number 989898. Birch Gold can help you roll an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and you are still eligible for a rebate of up to $10,000. Consider making right now your first time to buy gold and take advantage of a rebate up to $10,000 when you buy before January 30th. Text MK to the number 989898. Claim your eligibility today. Again, text MK to 989898. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.